Good morning and welcome to the SSW webinar on LightSwitch. This will be part one of a two-part series that we'll be holding or demoing for you guys at SSW. My name is Mehmet Ozdemir. I'm a solution architect here, and with me is Andrew Coates from Microsoft. He's a developer evangelist. He'll be answering some of my questions on LightSwitch and giving us a couple of demos along the way. So before we get started, over to Andrew. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Thanks, Mehmet. I've been a developer evangelist at Microsoft for almost 9 years now. Basically, it's very cool. I get to play with toys, get to speak to people like you about cool toys. They give me some more toys and they give me a paycheck. That's pretty much it. Being a developer evangelist is a lot of fun. One of the cool things about being a developer evangelist is you get to see this new stuff as it evolves. And I've been watching LightSwitch, the evolution of LightSwitch, since I first heard about it, probably 2.5 years ago now, and then we released it sort of a bit, so I guess July last year. It's been a very exciting journey.
Okay, so you get to play with cool toys and you get a paycheck. So how do I get that job?
You've got to wait for one of us to die. That's the way it works.
Great. Okay, well, let's get started. So, Andrew, LightSwitch. Can you give us like an introduction to LightSwitch, what it is, and how it fits in to the Visual Studio stack? Because
Sure.
now it is part of Visual Studio.
Absolutely. So the marketing guys have got this spiel. They say LightSwitch is the simplest way to create desktop applications business applications for the desktop and the cloud. Now, look, I'm going to break a bit of that down. The first thing is they say it's a simple way of doing things, and I want to make a distinction between simple and simplistic. So simple means it's straightforward, it's no nonsense. Simplistic means it doesn't do very much, and I don't want to give you the impression that LightSwitch is simplistic, but it is simple, and it's designed to be a rapid application development environment for building forms over data engines. And we've all built this stuff, right? We've all built hey, I've got 4 tables, I need to put a screen across them so I can update them. I've got a bunch of things that I need to expose to users that maybe for a short time, maybe for a long time, maybe I've already got an existing data source, but I just need to be able to quickly get at the data. Okay. And LightSwitch is really all about getting at the data. But more than that, it's all about taking away the drudgery, the busy work. And you may have heard me say this before, but I love the phrase, only write the code that only you can write. Most of the time as software developers, we spend a lot of time building stuff that we have to build every time. Validation, data transfer, data frameworks, authorization, authentication, all the stuff that is common to every application. So the idea with LightSwitch is that stuff is all done. The stuff that's common to every application, someone else is taking care of. Now, they've been taken care of by people who are very good at that stuff, people who do their stuff for a living and spend all their time writing frameworks. As a business developer, I don't want to be spending my time doing that stuff. I want to spend my time solving the problems of my business. Yeah, I want to spend the time understanding what the restrictions are between the way the data should work together. I want to understand how people are going to use the application, and that's the value that I add. The value I add is not writing frameworks, and someone else has done that for me. And LightSwitch is all about leveraging those frameworks. Okay, great.
If we look at the target market for LightSwitch, on one extreme you've got, say, something like an Access database, and on the other extreme I've got, say, a 3-tiered application running on SQL Server backend, and I've got an ASP, an MVC front end. Where does LightSwitch sit in this stack? So is it on this side of the on the Access side? Is it on the SQL side? Is it somewhere in the middle? What problems does it solve?
So I love the thought that actually LightSwitch fits across those. So it solves problems on all those different layers. You talked about the complex 3-tier data backend, middle tier running on some sort of ASP.NET, and then a presentation tier that does amazing things. So LightSwitch does all that. It creates a proper 3-tier application with entity framework, and it's back-ended on SQL Server or Azure or SharePoint or an OData source or a RIA data service, any of those sorts of things. That's fantastic. The middle tier has got data validation. It's got a proper submit pipeline. We'll talk a bit more about this architecture stuff a bit later on. But it is a fully featured 3-tiered enterprise-grade application that it creates. Now, at the other end of that, the simplicity the simplicity of creating a LightSwitch application to some extent makes it feel a bit more like an Access application. basically, at its very basic level, you go and say, here's the data I want to project, and here are the screens I'm going to use to do that. That's pretty much it. A lot of stuff, a lot of complex stuff is taken care of behind the scenes around validation and searching and exporting, lots of stuff. That just comes out of the box for free. But it builds on top of all of those enterprise grade level things. So all of the data access is done through OData, and it uses entity framework as the mechanism for passing stuff around. So it's kind of, instead of saying which tier does it fit in this way, I think it fits more across the top.
Okay, so you mentioned OData a few times there. So is this something new?
So OData's been around for a little while, and it's basically open data protocol. It's a common way of passing information around between applications or between services, and a number of the Microsoft servers are adopting OData as a way of communicating. Now, interestingly, in the latest version of LightSwitch, the LightSwitch team have moved the data layer to being a purely OData layer. So reading to and from the data is all done through OData, which is an amazing thing, because almost as a side effect of that, all of the data and all of the validation and all of the logic is now exposed as an OData endpoint,
okay,
which is very, very neat, because you can then get at it not just from a LightSwitch application, but from any other application as well.
So with LightSwitch, I'll be able to not only consume, but also expose OData?
So that absolutely will. And look, we're talking fairly abstractly here. Why don't we just jump across and show you how easy it is
I'd be interested
to quickly set up a scenario where, let's say we're creating a library application where we want to maybe capture some information about books and authors, and we want to be able to see that information on a screen so we can capture it. So if we switch across to my Visual Studio here, I'm running Visual Studio 2012. In fact, here's a good time to jump in here. LightSwitch ships with Visual Studio 2012, everything from professional and above. So if you've got Visual Studio 2012, you've got Visual Studio LightSwitch. Yeah, okay. As part of that deal if you've got professional and above. So I'm just at the start screen. I happen to be running Ultimate. As I say, I don't need to be running Ultimate. I just happen to be at the moment, and I'll just do a new project. And I've gone across to the LightSwitch node here in the new project dialog. And I've got a number of different options in the LightSwitch node. Now, out of the box, you won't see all these options. And here's one of the interesting things that happens with LightSwitch. I've actually installed a whole bunch of starter kits for LightSwitch. And one of the things we know about people who are building LightSwitch applications is they just want to get up and running. And there's a bunch of scenarios they want to be able to get up and running with.
You want the expense app or the time tracking?
The time tracking app or whatever it happens to be. So all that stuff's there. One of the really cool things is down the bottom there. I'm just going to point it out for now. We won't talk about it too much more this week, but the HTML application is a very, very neat thing. And so this is only the first webinar we're going to do on LightSwitch. Yes. We'll do another one early in the new year, and I'll show you some of the very cool new stuff. But this is a teaser. Not only do we expose our UI now as the option of having Silverlight, we now have an HTML5 option as well. But that's okay. We'll get back to that, as I said, next time we come back. So I'm just going to create a basic LightSwitch application here, and I'm going to choose C#. Now, I could choose Visual Basic, just as easy, and it's just VB.NET. And one of the key things to note here is this is a fully featured Visual Studio project. You can see that it's the same as any other Visual Studio project in that I can add it to source control, and I can just quickly go and add it to Team Foundation server or whatever my source control provider is. That's all built.
As far as the developer's concerned, it's a regular project type.
It is a completely regular project type. Let's just call this SSW Books as our project name, and I'll keep it in my Keep Forever folder, as I always do. And we'll click OK. And what we'll see is we'll go off and we'll get the project created. On the right-hand side, you'll see the normal stuff you would see with a project, except it's not quite normal, and I'll show you why in just a moment. The first thing is we see this designer surface on the left-hand side here, and the designer is where all of the LightSwitch, or almost all of the LightSwitch goodness happens. And the design is where we'll do screen design, the design is where we'll do data design, and so on. And we'll get back to that in just a moment. On the right-hand side, when I go to Solution Explorer, this looks like a fairly minimalist approach to a project. But what you don't see
there's not much information there at all.
That's right. What you don't see is what's going on behind the scenes. So if I go and show, switch from what we call logical view to what we call file view, this is actually a proper solution with a client project, a server project, and a common project in LightSwitch. And each of those things, I can do things like add references and look at the properties and have them build in different ways. All of the power of Visual Studio is there behind the scenes. But we understand that most people who use LightSwitch really only want to know about two things. They want to know about what data they're going to expose and what it's going to look like.
So that was a deliberate design decision.
Correct. Yeah, it's very, very cool. So for our quick demo, I'm going to create a couple of tables and a couple of screens, and I'll show you some of the powerful things you get with LightSwitch out of the box. So let's create a new table. And the first table we might create is a book table. And the book might have a title, which is a string, and we'll make it required. It might have a price, and interestingly, normally you'd store price as a decimal or a symbol, right? I'm going to store it as a money type. Now, you may not have heard of money types before, and that's because money is actually a business type that ships with LightSwitch. And LightSwitch has this concept of business types. And business types not only have not only have a back-end way of being stored, in money's case it's stored as decimal behind the scenes, but they have a bunch of other properties as well. So when I go to the properties window for this type, which is now money, like what's the currency code? We might change this to Australian dollars. What symbol mode should we use? Is it no currency symbol, or the ISO currency symbol, or the standard currency symbol? And then a bunch of other things around validation and so on, which are already there. So that's pretty neat. I won't make the price required, but we can put it in there. It might have an abstract, which is a string.
You mentioned money. What other?
We might get to a few of those as we go through. Okay. Yeah, there's a bunch of others, and we'll get to them. We'll make it so it's a nice big abstract. We might have a cover shot, which we can make an image. Now, the interesting thing about the image type is that the different types have got different ways of being displayed. So by default, a string field will display with a text box, as you'd expect. And if it's not being edited, then it'll display with a label. Yeah. Again, it's not editable. We've got an image on there. We've got a default image field, image control, and the image control is either an image viewer or an image editor. And the image editor has all the logic built into it to upload images into the database. So all that stuff is, again, taken care of for you. We'll have a look at what that looks like.
So you don't have to write any code to do that?
No, I haven't written any code so far, right? And you'll continue to watch me write no code for some time. Is there anything else I need for a book? I need the author.
Yep.
But an author could write more than one book, so it would probably make sense to put it in a new table. So we'll have an author table as well. And the author might have a family name, which is a string, a given name, which is a string. It might have a date of birth. We won't make that compulsory necessarily, but we will say that it's a date field. And normally you'd say it's a date time, right? And you have to deal with the fact that it's got the midnight on there and sort of thing. I'm going to just call it a date field. So behind the scenes, it's going to get stored as a date time in the back end. But when it displays to me, it's only going to show as a date, because that's all I care about. One of the other business types that I really want to show is this concept of a phone number. So the phone number business type behind the scenes is stored as a string. But if we change it to a phone number here in LightSwitch, what we get is the ability to do a whole lot of things at design time as well as at runtime. So remember at runtime I said that we might use a different control, and I'll show you the control that we use for phone number at runtime when we get there. But at design time, we get to choose which phone numbers types are valid. Now, phone numbers are really interesting because the canonical format, you have the country code and the area code and so on. And of course, being a global application, this ships with a number of different codes already. I think pretty much for all the 50 states plus Canada. Yeah, but being in Australia, we probably want to add an Australian one as well. So the Australian format is the country code, which is 61 usually, and then a single digit area code, 2 or 3 or whatever, and then for 8 numbers.
8 numbers, that's right, yep.
All right. And so the key thing here is, this is a cool, this is a cool business type that handles all the validation stuff for you at design time and at runtime. But B, this is an example of the extensibility of LightSwitch. You can build these business types which expose UI at design time and runtime. So if you have I don't know, your order number field, for example, has got a particular format it needs to be in, then you can do all that stuff so that you define this field as an order number field rather than a string field, and then all of that validation flows along with it, which is pretty neat.
So just on that point, Andrew, when you said you can define it as an order number field, What work is involved in creating your own custom data types?
So that's what I would call a more advanced LightSwitch topic. LightSwitch is very extensible, and then and creating LightSwitch extensions is a task I wouldn't say for the end user, but for the professional developer. And there's some.
But it's certainly stuff that we can do, right?
Absolutely, and it is. I wouldn't call it straightforward, but it is. But it's well documented, and it's fairly mechanical to get it done, right? Again, the value you're adding is the fact that you understand the business problem as the developer, and you can define this particular business type to suit your application. So I've just added this additional phone number.
So in this example that you've got here, we've got our country code, our area code, our phone numbers defined.
Yep.
So basically, not only have we defined our data type, but we've got all this validation out of the box for free.
Yep. This is what you would call declarative validation as opposed to programmatic validation. Yeah, I might show you some programmatic validation later on if we get a chance. So I'll just put one more in there, which is the mobile number format. Oops. That's our mobile number format for Australia as well. Country code, 3-digit area code, and 6 numbers. And I can move those up so they can go to the top of the screen. So that's the most important one. In fact, we might put that one up the top as well. And now, if I put this test phone number in there, plus 612-987-02719, then it displays as format 1, and it recognises it, and I can do testing with it. And that's pretty cool. So we'll save that. The last thing I want to put here is email address. Oops.
So is that going to be a string?
It will be stored behind the scenes as a string, but I'm going to put it as an email address type as well. And the cool thing about that is I get a whole bunch of stuff over here in my properties that makes sense. I can give it a default domain. So ssw.com.au might be the default domain. So if I just put Mehmet in there, then it'll append at ssw.com.au for me automatically. There's a whole bunch of other stuff around. Do I require an email domain? So sometimes if you're building an intranet application, you only want the alias, you don't want the domain. But I can turn that on or off. And again, that's part of the validation that's built into the business type. Now, have you ever built an email address validator?
I attempted and failed on a number of occasions.
So the regex for validating email addresses is about this long. I have them out of shot on both sides.
There's always something you miss.
And exactly right. But the cool thing is, this has now been done. And again, this is one of those things that somebody else can do once for you, and you can just get on with. That's a fantastic stuff. So now the last thing I really want to do is add a relationship. In fact, the second last thing I want to do is add a relationship, because I'll show you one more thing in a sec. So I'll add a relationship, and we'll say that authors and books. I don't want an author to have many books. I want a book to have. I want an author to have many books, not a book to have many authors. So I'm going to go this way around instead, one to many. And the delete behaviour is all there. All the relational integrity stuff is built in again to the system, and we must try to make it as easy as possible for people to understand these sorts of things. Okay, so now I've got a relationship, and notice the relationships are represented here on the diagram. The last thing I wanted to add was this concept of a computed field. Now, at the moment, when I display an author record, if I can only choose one field to display that author, to represent that author, probably choose surname.
Makes sense. Yeah,
which makes sense. And by coincidence, that's the one that'll get chosen in this particular case because it's the first string field in this table.
Oh, that's a logic?
By default, it says find the first string field in the table. But really what I want it to do is show me the full name. I don't want to store the full name in multiple times. And we'll get, when we show you attaching to an external database later on, I'll show you how convenient this is too. But I can define what we call a computed property, which doesn't get stored in a database, but the definition gets stored in the model, the data model, and gets computed at runtime. So we'll call this the full name. And the full name is going to be a string, but it's going to be a computed field.
Okay.
And then I can just go and say, what method should you use to compute the field? And I'll just say result equals string dot. And notice I'm just writing C# here. And then I have complete access to the entity. This dot family name, comma, this dot given name. And the formatting I want to do is just...
well, that was pretty easy.
That's pretty straightforward. And now, the last thing I need to do, I'll save that, is jump in here and say that for this table, or this entity, the summary property is no longer going to be family name, it's going to be full name. So whenever you have a summary for this particular record, and you can only show one for this particular table, and you only show one field from the record,
That's the one we
show me
want.
their full name instead. So that's all very well, and now I've defined the data. How easy is it to surface? Well, there's a few things we need to do, right? The first thing is we need to be able to add books and add authors, and we want to be able to search for things and all that sort of thing. All the standard sort of stuff you want to be able to do. So let's start off by doing that. The first thing we'll do is we'll create a screen that allows us to add new authors. Now, when I add a new screen, this is one of the core parts that makes LightSwitch so valuable, I think. We've taken what we discovered to be, the 85% use case for people creating screens in this sort of application. There are 5 basic things you need to do. You need to be able to show the details of a record. You need to be able to have a grid of a number of records on the screen.
Yeah, yep.
You want to be able to show a sort of list and details. So here's a list of the records, and here are the details for the currently selected record. Yeah. You want to be able to create new data, and you want to be able to search. Yeah. Now that's all very cool. But really what we want to be able to do is potentially, in your organisation, you might have more things. And so this is a completely extensible screen. You can add new screens to add new screen types, new screen templates to this layout. So in this particular case, we're going to create new data for authors. Yeah. And interestingly, it's going to allow us to add a related field, a related table as well. We're not going to do it in this case. We'll come back to that in a minute.
But the reason why that's come up is because you defined the relationship
in our model.
earlier on.
That's exactly right. Yeah, yeah, correct. Okay, so we'll say okay. Now, don't get a shock when you see this screen. This is the screen designer.
Looks a bit foreign.
It does look a bit foreign, but the interesting thing here is that this is a logical definition of what the screen will look like, not a physical definition, not a what you see is what you get. We'll see that in a minute to some extent. But if you think about, as a developer, if you think about what's going on behind the scenes, this is the view. If you think about model, view, view model, this is the view. This is the view model over here.
Yeah. And
the model itself is the stuff we define in the data section. And so that's exactly what's going on. So for creating a new author, we've pretty much got everything we need here. We're going to be able to enter their email address and their telephone number and their date of birth. We might decide that we want to put the full name up towards the top. Yeah. And we can do all those sorts of things. So we can create new authors there. So what I might do at this stage is just press F5.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens. And the first time it runs, it takes a moment or two to do some compilation and so on. It's got to do a bunch of stuff behind the scenes of the project. So this takes a moment. But what we'll get is a Silverlight application running on the desktop, an out-of-browser Silverlight application that will allow us to create a new author. So I don't know, Tom Clancy, one of my favourite authors. His date of birth. Now, I didn't have to choose to use a date picker for this. Because it's a date field, remember I defined it as a date field before? That's right, yeah. It's shown me a date picker. And the date picker's got all of the capabilities you'd expect it to have. He was born in the 1950s, I think, 1953. We'll call it 1953. I don't know what date it actually was. Let's choose the 17th of June. All right, but there it is. His phone number. Now, I can never remember what this canonical format looks like for phone numbers. But because this is a phone number field, it uses the phone number control. Okay. And now it asks me those details.
Oh, that's seriously cool.
It is seriously cool. And again, I didn't have to write this stuff. That comes out of the box. 6.1. I think he comes and sits at my desk most of the time.
No, that's impressive.
And it's formatted it for me in the right way too. I didn't put spaces in here, notice?
Yeah.
But up here, it's got the format that I defined in my formats.
That's impressive.
Yeah. Email address is tc redoctober.com. Right, okay. Now, because that is not a valid email address, it's automatically appended to the ssw.com.au. If you didn't want that, what I really want to do is @. Now, I want to show you one other thing. If I put an @ here as well, what's it going to do? It's going to say you've got a validation issue. Validation's all built into this as well. If I click for more details, it tells me it's got an invalid email address. So I'll change that back to a dot.
Is it possible to customize those messages?
Absolutely. Yep. All that validation stuff is possible. So now it's valid again. If I close this now, by the way, it tells me, hey, you've got dirty data. Are you sure you want to close? You didn't have to write any of that stuff either. This is the cool thing about LightSwitch is all this stuff happens out of the box.
So one question here. We've defined the model.
Yep.
We defined the tables.
Yep.
Where's this data getting saved?
That's an excellent question. So because we called it intrinsic data, remember I had two options at the very beginning. I could have said create a table or attach to a data source.
Yes.
Now what's happening for my development time is actually an MDF file gets created. And
On the fly.
On the fly. And the MDF file is attached as a file attached to a local instance of SQL Server. Yeah, so that's what's happening behind the scenes.
Okay.
And so don't tell the end users, but they're actually using SQL. Shh.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the cool thing, right? So the neat thing is when we get to the option to deploy this, it'll ask us what server we want to put it on and what the admin what the credentials are that give you permissions to create tables and those sorts of things. But for the development time, it just all happens behind the scenes. It's pretty neat. So there we go. I've created a new author. I can create another new author if I want to, and maybe this one's Terry Pratchett.
So we're actually debugging this app, right? So this app's actually running in debugging mode now.
Yep.
I noticed the bottom
Down
right-hand screen, there's a little design screen.
Yep.
So we can actually we can change the way this screen works while it's running.
Yep. I'll show you that in just one sec. I'll just put Terry Pratchett in here. And notice, by the way, his full name is up the top here. And Tom Clancy's name, by the way, in this one. It's got Clancy Tom in the tab. That's because that's the summary field. Yeah, remember we defined the summary field before?
Right.
So Terry Pratchett, he was born, I think, also in the, let's call it the, let's say 1960, September 26th. TP discworld.co.uk. I don't have his phone number, but I didn't make a compulsory field. Or maybe I did make it a compulsory field. In fact, I know I did. You know how I can tell? It's in bold. And this is another cool thing about LightSwitch. Just
So
because
date of birth is optional.
Date of birth is optional, but telephone number and email address are compulsory. It's chosen a different format there. 6.1, 2. So you can see there that we've got. It showed us the rendered version of the phone number.
Yes.
Decided I got it wrong, and so I dropped the thing down and got it right. This is what I love. This thing about LightSwitch is that stuff is all taken care of for me. So now I've got two new authors, Tom Clancy and Terry Pratchett. So let's get out of there, and I'll show you a couple of other things. In fact, let's just have a look at this. In fact, we can look at it. We can look at it here. I'll close this. But I was going to show you the way of designing the screen. So before I do that, I just want to have a quick look in my Solution Explorer, the properties of this. And then what I really want to do is find the back end for this data, which I think. Okay, that's fine. What I need to do here actually is one more thing. 4201. That's beautiful. Okay, so let me just run this up again. And what I should be able to do is go to localhost 2 T's. So now I have an OData endpoint, which has got books and authors. Those are the two things that I created before. Now I haven't had to do much to make this happen, right?
Wow, that's seriously cool.
But if I want to look at the authors, I can just go authors. And there we go. We've got
Tom Clancy.
Tom Clancy right there, and there's his email address, and Terry Pratchett. Now, if I did this, and there's just Terry Pratchett. All right, that's just a standard OData endpoint. Now, how much code did I have to write to get that OData working?
You didn't write any.
Didn't write any. But this this particular service here, this OData endpoint, I can now attach to anything I like. And obviously, this is my debugging one in localhost 4201. But when I deploy it somewhere, yeah, the middle tier will expose the data as an OData endpoint.
And can you? I'm assuming you'd be able to define which endpoints you're exposing, which ones.
Yep. And what's more, I can put validation on them. I can put all of my logic around authorization, all that sort of stuff, all as part of the LightSwitch application. So it can prompt me for password before I log in, all that kind of thing.
So you're getting a lot of stuff in the box for free.
Yeah, at Microsoft we hate to use the word free, but you get a lot of stuff in the box for the price that you pay for the product, whatever that price happens to be. Yeah. So I'll quickly go back and we'll do this. We'll press F5 again, and I'll show you that design on the screen because that's quite an interesting one. In fact, did I press F5? Maybe I wasn't in the. Yes, it's running. It says it's just coming up. Here we go. The first thing it does by default, by the way, is create a new author, because that's the only screen I've got, so it does it by default. Let's change one thing around. So yes, I'm happy to lose any data because I don't have any here at the moment, and we'll change the family name. In fact, let's change the family name for being, instead of having a width of auto size, we'll give it an exact width of, I don't know, 250 pixels. Or, even better, it's 80 characters.
So we're making these changes while the application's
fly.
running, on the fly,
yep.
And these changes are being written back to our solution,
yep.
Our project.
And I haven't. The other thing I've said is I don't want it stretched. I want it to be left aligned, and it's going to be 250 pixels. So what we'll get now, like when we save this, is that we now have the given name I was working on is only 250 pixels wide. Now I will close this. I haven't saved any. I don't want to save anything in this new author, so I say cancel. The dirty data stuff cuts in. Oh, sorry, I don't want to save anything, so I don't press cancel. I press OK. And let me go back to my screen designer for this locally. Create new author. The given name, the properties, has all those changes that we made before.
Oh yes.
Yeah, 250 pixels. It's all there. So that's pretty cool. It means that you do get a chance to do some WYSIWYG stuff, and you also get a chance to lay stuff out. Okay. So that's pretty neat.
Okay, so what we've seen there is, so basically is while it's running, we can make those changes on the fly,
yep.
And then exit out, and then we can just carry on.
Right.
So we really didn't have to go back and reapply those changes, just go
right.
straight.
And that only works because we're in debug mode. It doesn't work, obviously when you're in runtime, that doesn't happen for just anybody. You've got to be in debug mode. So that's cool.
So so what we've been looking at so far is Silverlight, and I know we're going to go into more detail on the HTML client next time. But is it possible for you to just give us a quick intro to the HTML preview, what we can see,
sure.
Expect to see?
Yeah,
in that version?
absolutely. In fact,
what it's targeted for.
Before we do that, why don't we just nip across, and I'll just explain what's going on behind the scenes in the architecture here, because there's a lot to take in. I'm just going to flick across to here. And this is what the LightSwitch architecture looks like. The things we've seen so far, at the back end in the data access layer, we've backed onto SQL Server. Now, there's a lot of different things you can back onto, and in the next demo, we'll get a chance to have a look at where you define how you can back onto other things. But in this particular case, we've backed onto SQL Server. There's a middle tier that's happening, and the middle tier is running, in this particular case, in our case, currently running locally, but using OData to pass data back and forth between the back end and the front end. The neat thing is that there's a whole pipeline of stuff that's going on, and one of the key things about LightSwitch is how many different places in the data process you can break in and either examine or validate or change or update or cancel all those things that are happening. And so this submit pipeline has a heap of hooks where it raises events all the way along this thing. All of the queries that happen, one of the fundamental things about LightSwitch is that all of the screens are based on queries. All the queries that happen are link queries. And what's more, you have access to the actual link object before it runs. So you can go and update things at runtime, depending on things like some sort of real-time thing. You might know, for example, here's an example that I've made up on the spot, so we'll see how well it works. But you might know that the data center in Mumbai is down, and that you really want to not look at this particular part of the query because it's going to something in Mumbai. So at runtime, you could have a thing that examines the query and says, if you're using data from the Mumbai data center, use the backup one over here instead, and look and point at it. All that kind of stuff could happen. So there's some neat stuff that goes on through there. And then at the front end, what we've got at the moment is a bunch of screens, which you've seen, some methods. So one of the methods we saw was the calculate the full name. A bunch of controls. We saw the various control types, the standards plus the ones that ship as business types. Again, the data workspace is what's used to create all that, to bind to for all the data display using OData. And then it's on a Silverlight front end. Yeah. Now, soon, as you say, HTML's coming as well. Now, the interesting thing about HTML is it's in preview at the moment. The preview 2, the client preview 2 of the HTML client for LightSwitch has just been released, and we'll give you a URL at the end where you can go to get all this stuff. But the HTML control allows you to surface, and it's mainly designed for mobile devices, slates and so on. But the HTML control is designed to surface. Excellent. It's designed to surface pretty much the same information, but instead of a Silverlight with HTML, and it's designed to put it on a mobile device, whether it's a phone or a slate or whatever.
So when we're doing Silverlight versus HTML, are we doing that in the same project, or would they be separate? One project for the corporate version and another project for the tablet version, or HTML.
So generally they'll exist in the same solution, but they'll be separate projects. So there'll be a client project for Silverlight and a client project for HTML, and that actually makes it really easy to do these things. And often we'll see these as separate separate applications for the same purpose to some extent. So there'll be you might have a heads down data entry application for, I don't know, taking orders or whatever it is back at headquarters, and then when you're out there on the road, the sales rep might have a companion application that runs on a slate as an HTML device, HTML5 device that I don't know, allows them to check that orders have gone properly and maybe inspect the way things are being displayed, the products are being displayed on the site, those kinds of things. And so often you'll see these complementary applications that are part of the same process. Yeah. Okay. So that's the basic architecture of a LightSwitch application, and so that's what's going on behind the scenes. LightSwitch, the Silverlight stuff, by the way, can be either hosted in a browser host or out of browser. The one we saw was out of browser, but it can be in browser as well. And the cool thing about Silverlight in browser is it also runs on other OSs. So I've got a great version of my LightSwitch application running on a Mac, in Safari. Silverlight in Safari runs really well.
On a Mac.
Yeah. Imagine that. Imagine that. So let me quickly chat about the OData as well. One of the things I wanted to talk about was that every different data source in LightSwitch is exposed as a separate OData endpoint. So the only data source we've seen so far is the intrinsic one, what we call application data.svc, and that's the one I showed you in the browser. But in the next demo, we'll go across and we'll attach to data running in existing data running in a SQL server, and that'll expose it as a separate data source, and I'll show you how cool that is as well. So if nothing else, you can just expose a data source you've got at the back end as OData simply by pointing LightSwitch at it. So that's really, really cool. And the nice thing about that is that any OData client can get at it. And of course, pretty much anything is an OData client nowadays. You can create Windows 8 applications, Windows Phone applications, you can create iOS applications, you can create Android applications, all pointing at OData. And they can be pointing at the same OData. And that's really powerful.
Before we do that, we're just on 11:40 right now. Titus, have we got any questions coming through?
Got a number.
Okay, so how about we get through these questions?
Yeah, cool.
And then, time permitting, we'll get onto that demo because I know there's some questions that have come through.
Right.
Okay, is there any support for offline data sources as your data sync framework? How would you create an offline application with LightSwitch?
That's an awesome question. I'm not sure who asked that, but thank you. That's very cool. Offline, the way you do offline is you'd have to set up your own data sync behind the scenes. So what you'd do is you'd set up the sync with a local, probably a local SQL Express instance, and then point your LightSwitch application at the local SQL Express instance. And then LightSwitch would talk to that like it normally would, and the offline sync would happen using sync services or something like that between your local instance and the
definitely doable.
server. It's certainly doable, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to ask about native support for Windows RT, Windows Phone 8, as well as device agnostic builds.
Okay, so the device agnostic builds bit, and I'm guessing this came through just before we started mentioning the HTML5 stuff.
Yep. So watch this space next month.
Probably just after the new year.
Yeah, after New Year.
Just after New Year.
More detail.
Yeah, more detail. But you can go to the LightSwitch site now and download the client preview, which includes HTML, the HTML client preview, which includes device agnostic capabilities. It's not as full featured, I have to say, as the Silverlight version. But that's the price you pay for using HTML to some extent, right? You don't get some of those things. So Windows Phone 8, Windows RT, device agnostic, all those sorts of things run beautifully with HTML in the HTML5 version.
And just a note to you guys out there, I did notice that with the HTML preview, it's really cool because it actually ships as a fully functional VHD or a virtual machine. So you don't need to do anything at all to install it or configure it. You just run it.
So interestingly, that was true for the first client version.
No.
The new client version is part of the Office data tools.
Okay.
So the Office tools.
But it's easy enough to get going, right?
Well, it's just a single install and just installs as part of your Visual Studio.
Awesome. Can OData require authentication? I think that's
absolutely yes. Yeah, and that's really simple to set up. You go into the properties of the project. Say I want to require authentication, and you can authenticate against a username and password. So the ASP.NET authentication provider, or against Active Directory.
And of course we can extend that ourselves as well.
Absolutely. Yep.
Can I use WIF for authentication and authorization?
So not at the moment. The Windows Identity Framework, not in the current build. But again, it's something you could extend. So not out of the box is, I guess, the answer to the question.
But if you're willing to write the code,
exactly
then
right.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. Any more questions, Titus, or was that the last one? Last one. Okay. Is there some design features available for other data sources, ability to create columns, etc.? Do you have that for other data sources, ability to create columns?
So you can certainly create columns on your intrinsic data. There's some more on the other side.
Or do you have to do that through the web interface? Say SharePoint.
So if you have an external data source, then locally, the only things you can do are add those computed columns.
Yeah, in the model,
or change the type, the type to one of the business types.
Yeah.
So if you've got a string field, but you know it's actually a phone number, you can drop that down and say this is a phone number field, and then all of that validation logic will get applied before it gets persisted as a string to the back end.
I think maybe that question is also asking is could you maybe like create a hybrid table? You know, like it might be 5 columns are being sourced from the SQL database, but then you're sort of injecting 3 more columns.
So the answer is kind of yes. You can't inject into another table, into the same table, but you can create another table locally, and then create a relationship between those two. And we have this concept of virtual relationships between intrinsic data and external data sources, and between the different external data sources. So if you have a SharePoint list and a SQL table and some intrinsic data, you can set relationships between all those things and have them displayed and validated through LightSwitch in that way. It happens for you automatically as part of the model.
Well, we've got through the questions. We've got a few minutes to spare, so if we could take a quick look at the OData demo.
Oh, it sounds like we've got one more question.
One more question?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll get to that in a second. We'll quickly have a look at this other demo. So I'll go back to Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project. And it's going to be a LightSwitch application again. We'll call it SSW external data. And I am going to save those things. Why not?
Yep. We're going to start selling books.
I'm going to start selling books, exactly right. Yeah.
Should have been called SSW ebooks.
That's right. So this time I get the same thing. I'm going to start with data, but instead of creating a new table of my own, I'm going to attach to an external data source. And this will look like a very familiar dialogue to anyone who's done anything with Visual Studio and data. there's a bunch of different data sources I can connect to. I'll start on the right-hand side here. WCF RIA service. Any WCF RIA service I can just point at. It'll go and suck the metadata out and expose it to me as a data source. And if it's a read-write data service, then it'll expose all those methods. If it's a read-only data service, it'll only expose the read methods for me. That's fine. I can not only do I expose OData, I can also consume OData natively. That's a new thing in LightSwitch 2012. I love that. It's very, very cool. We won't do that this time, but maybe in the next episode. SharePoint
in 2013.
Well, the SharePoint we're pointing at here is anything from 2010 onwards.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is pointing at SharePoint lists. Now, when we get to the next one, we'll talk about creating apps for SharePoint 2013.
I can't wait to get on to
very,
that
very cool.
Yeah.
But hold your horses on that one. And the last one is any database with an EF provider we can connect to. And in this particular case, we're going to connect to a SQL database, but it could, anything with an EF provider we can connect to here. So I click next. I'm going to connect to my local SQL Express, and I've got the famous Northwind database on here. I'll just test that works. Yes. Click OK. And what's going to happen here is it's going to pull in all of the database objects from the Northwind database. There's a bunch of views. There's a bunch of tables. I'll take all the tables. In fact, yeah, let's take all the tables and all the views. Why not? I can bring them all in. I don't have to. I can bring in whatever I like. In fact, I won't bother bringing in the views in this particular case. We'll click Finish. And what you'll see over on the right-hand side when we get into the Solution Explorer, that's fine. It tells me something about not having primary keys and inferring them and creating one for me easily. I'll continue. What we'll see over in the Solution Explorer is that in the data sources, I now have this thing called Northwind data. Now, I don't know if you noticed in the last one, but it was called application data.
Yes.
Which is when I had my intrinsic one. And now I've got all these different things, so these tables, categories and customers and so on. I can very quickly go and create a new screen. So let's go and have a look at the orders table. In fact, let's have a look at the employees table. I'll create a new screen for that. So we'll go to we'll create a screen. We'll look at a list and details. So I'll get a list of the employees. And because it knows about the relationships, it's all come across from the external data. It also knows that I might have people working for me.
Yes.
I might have territories that I work in, and there are orders that have been placed through me. And so all that stuff can come across as part of this process. I'll click OK.
So this is if you've got a well-designed database with all your foreign keys defined,
all the stuff
you're
comes
going to
across
get a lot of stuff in there
now,
without having to do much work.
Before I do this, I want to quickly go across and go back in here. And in fact, I'm going to remove this because there's one thing I wanted to do before we did this. Yep, I'll take that out. I want to go into the employee table. And here's something. Remember we talked about the fact that employees, data types, while they come across as the data type that lives in the back end, I can define what they should actually look like. So my birth date, instead of being actually a date and time, I really just want it to be a date.
Date, sure.
And the same with my hire date. The phone number, I want it to be a telephone number. Remember we showed the phone number fields before, and I can put the formats back in here again. The photo, instead of being binary, I actually want it to be an image, because that's what I know that's what it is. And that'll do for now, except I do want to say, when you show me a list of employees, I don't want their last name to be the only thing you see. I want their full name to be the thing you see. But I don't store their full name anywhere in the database. So the same way as I did before with the intrinsic data, I'm going to create a new full name field. And the full name field is going to be string, and it's going to be a computed method. Notice it doesn't give me an option for it not to be computed, because it knows I can't add columns to it that get stored in the database, but I can add columns to it that are stored as just computed fields in the model.
Right, so when you were designing the model yourself, it gave you the option because it was either going to create the column for you,
correct,
or make it computed.
And it's this dot, I think it was last name, this dot first name, and we'll just make it. And now I've got a field for that as well. So let's go back into the Solution Explorer, and I'll create a new screen. Notice I could create a screen by adding screen here, or by clicking in the designer before. So I'll just say I'll add a screen, and again a list of the employees and the details for them for employees, and again I'll add these back in. Now the reason I deleted and added back in is because once you've defined the screen, that stuff's actually in an XML file somewhere, and so changing field types or changing field types doesn't automatically update the screen.
Okay.
So this happened this time. So now you can see that for the home phone, instead of being a text box like these are, it's actually, I don't know if you can see that, but that's actually a different icon for a phone number. Because it's a phone number editor, not a text box. And that's the editor we saw before, when you dropped it down, it had the country code and the area code and so on.
So when you're creating these screens, it's not only reading the table, it's reading the data types, and it's making intelligent decisions about
which
what
controls to use. That's right, absolutely.
Screen.
So now here we go. We've got this screen. I press F5. Uh, 15776. We might look at that in a sec as well. Was it called? It was called Northwind Data. No. .svc, that'll do. So there is all the data that we have got sitting in a back end somewhere, now exposed as an OData endpoint, with no work to expose it as an OData endpoint. If I were to look at employees, then I can do that. And here are all the employees. That's pretty cool stuff, I reckon. Anyway, that's a side effect, which is a very, very neat side effect of the way it works. So we'll go back. Where are we? Here. And here's our list of employees. Now, for some reason, you know why?
Summary.
While I created the full name, I didn't say that the summary field for this table was supposed to be the full name. So let's go back and fix that, and then we'll start again. We'll do it again. So I'll close that, and we'll go back into the employee table. And now remember I said that by default the summary field is the first string field it comes to, but in fact I don't want it to be the last name, the summary table. I want it to be the full name, which is here. So now the summary is the full name. If I press F5 now.
So that works on controls that display that show you a summary.
Anywhere that you can only use a single field to say which record you're on in the table, it uses the summary field.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you get to define the summary field, what it looks like. So in a moment we'll just see how this looks. And I just want to point out a few things you get out of the box here with LightSwitch. The first one, so there's the summaries. Let's put Robert King in there. Notice over here there's nothing in the photo field, but I can change that. Maybe I'll choose. There's a good-looking guy. We'll use Ed Katabar as Robert's. Ed, by the way, famous SQL guy. I've got an invalid phone number in here for some reason. Oh, okay, because it's
their local numbers.
It's a local number, so we'll put +442, and we'll take some of these out until it's valid. You know what? We'll do one we know works. +612. No, I didn't put that in there either. No, +1.
This is a new database.
That's right.
Yeah.
555.
Yeah.
555. 5555. How's that? Beautiful. Excellent. So that works. Even though they're in London, they've got a +1 phone number. So that's cool. So a few things you get out of here.
So we've added that image.
Yep.
That image, when we hit save, is going to get written back to the database.
It's going to get persisted straight back into our database.
And we didn't write any code.
None. Are you impressed? I'm impressed. I love that. That's pretty cool.
Mightily impressed.
Mightily impressed. All right. A couple of things to notice here, by the way. The first one is we know we've adjusted Robert King because it's got a little star next to it. We're getting data, the dirty data checking out of the box. We know this employee list detail has got unsaved changes. We've got a star next to it. We've still got compulsory fields in here. We know they're compulsory because they're required in the data at the back end. That's all come through. We know they're bold. Here there are which orders are available as part of this from this person.
So the related information has also come across.
All come across, yeah? Beautiful.
So how many lines of code did we write? I think one.
One. We just wrote the one for the happy birthday, Alexandra, by the way. we just wrote the code to do the summary field. That's all we've done. Now I get a bunch of other stuff as well. If I want this information exported, I can export that to an Excel file.
No.
You don't believe me? Here it comes.
No, I don't.
Here it comes. There it is. All that information in Excel. How many lines of code did I write for that? Absolutely zero. That's pretty neat. Again, that comes out of the box. I can turn that on and off for any list in LightSwitch just by a simple property. I can do searching. If I know that this order was done with Princessa, P-R-I-N, that's probably enough, then I can filter this, and there's the only one, Princess Isabella. Yeah, that's searching again. No lines of code. Down the bottom here, I got paging. Again, all done for me out of the box from LightSwitch. This is really powerful stuff. This is stuff that happens in every application.
Yeah,
right?
it is.
Here's the key thing.
It's all the bread and butter stuff.
All the bread and butter stuff, and I can concentrate on the stuff that I need.
Yeah.
That what makes sense in terms of how does this work? Do I need to put anyway? I think the key thing here about LightSwitch is that it takes away a heap of the busy work, and I'd leave you with this one thing: only write the code that only you can write, because as business developers, we spend far too much time with the busy work and not enough time being productive.
Well, that was a pretty awesome demonstration, Andrew. Before we close off, we've just got 3 more questions that we'll quickly rattle through.
Yep.
I think this one we've covered off anyway, but when you're attaching to an existing data source, do you have to design the tables in SharePoint, for example, or can you do it through SharePoint? I think that's
through LightSwitch, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, through LightSwitch.
Okay.
I think if you're connecting to an external source, then
that's what you use to design.
That's what you're using.
Yep, that's right. Yep.
So not much you can do about that one.
And you don't want to either.
That's
I
right.
think the last thing you want is people at the LightSwitch level
mucking
around with the schema of your data source. Yeah.
Permission levels. Can we discuss permission levels?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. We'll get to that in one sec. So I want to show you.
Can SharePoint applications be created now with SharePoint 2010, or is this a SharePoint 2013 only feature? Well,
So
apps are a 2013.
The apps are a 2013 feature,
Yeah.
but you can get at SharePoint data from 2010 onwards. Yeah.
So I think, I think the thing there is you won't be able to create like a farm solution or anything like that, but you can create a SharePoint 2013 app, but we'll be able to get to SharePoint 2010 data.
Correct.
Yep. Permission levels. Can I restrict fields to certain users? Can I restrict forms to certain members of a certain group?
Absolutely. So that goes with the other question we had before, and that's why I thought we'd kind of do this together. I'm going to go into the properties of the project. I'm going to look at access control, and I'm going to say I want to use forms or Windows authentication, and I can use security groups or users for authentication. I can use forms authentication, and then I can have various. So we have concept of permissions and roles. So the permissions might be, I don't know, employee, human resource, edit employees. And then for my debug, for debugging, I can turn this permission on or off. I can make me a security administrator or just for debugging. Yeah. So once I've done that, so if I say edit employees, I'm going to give myself. I'm not going to give myself the edit employees permission for now. Okay. And then what I can do in the Solution Explorer and in the employees table, I can write some code that says.
Do you mean code or clicking stuff?
I can click stuff, and employees can update. So can I update this? I can say result equals application dot user dot has permission, and then the permission ID is permissions dot edit employees.
Well, that was easy enough.
Okay. Now, that's cool. Let's just press F5 here. Now, I've done this on the fly, remember, so I may have left a step out. I don't think I have. But hopefully what we'll see is in this screen,
you shouldn't be able
I shouldn't be able to edit. Let's have a quick look. I always love these things on the fly, right?
So these permissions, we can apply these across screens.
Yep.
Down to field level.
Yep. Down to field level. Not so easily down to field level. Certainly down to table level. So look, all of these are read-only fields now, right?
Yep.
The orders though, I can still get at.
Yep. Because
I haven't restricted on there.
Yep.
But I can't edit any of these things, and I can't change the photo. Robert King's photo is still there, by the way.
But what we could do, could we create alternate views of employee?
Yep.
And
sure.
then we could then
absolutely
apply the permissions to those.
Yep. And if I didn't have access, and I can do it at screen level as well. I did that at the data level.
Yeah.
I can do it at the screen level as well. And so almost exactly the same thing. I can say, can you run this screen or not? In fact, if I go out of here,
so you could have that cut down version, or
if you wanted to, yeah. And there's a number of ways you can do it.
So there's a few ways.
So if I go to here into the employee list detail screen and I write code here, I've got the can run method. And that gets called straight away as well, and I can check to see whether I can even run this screen. And if I can't, it won't even appear in the menus. Yeah,
okay.
This is one of the really extensible pieces. Anyway, so I know it's 12.
Yes, I think we've gone way over time, we're approaching time. That's where we are for today. So looking forward to in the new year, going on to part 2 of this. So probably just after Christmas.
Yep.
Looking into more details, especially into the HTML client, looking at more of the SharePoint stuff, how we can use LightSwitch to actually write SharePoint apps.
Cool.
In the meantime, if you guys have got any questions, feel free to shoot them through to us guys here at SSW. I'm sure if you've got any questions, we'll be happy to forward them on to Andrew as well. But thanks, Andrew, for your time.
Thanks, David. The last thing I'd leave you with is if you want to go and find out more about LightSwitch, msdn.com/LightSwitch. That's the only URL you need to know. There's links to everything else from there, including all the client preview stuff. msdn.com/LightSwitch.
Yep, great. Okay, thank you. And until next time, have a great new year and a happy Christmas. Thanks.